Welcome to U-Wrench. Today we're on the Mark V Grand Caravan. In this video I'm going to show you how to replace your rotors and your pads. So we're going to be going from this to this. So we've definitely got some work to do. Let's crack on. So as you can see, we have the car lifted and the wheel removed, so we're ready to make a start. Now, there's only one really important thing that you need to bear in mind really when it comes to the brakes on these particular vehicles. And that's the simple fact that there are actually two different versions of the brakes on the Grand Caravan. First of all, you have the standard version of the brakes, and there's a second version called heavy duty brakes. Now, it doesn't really matter which of those two versions that you have because the basic process is virtually identical. But just for reference, we are demonstrating on a car that's fitted with the heavy duty brakes. We have done a separate video for the standard brakes. We'll add a link to that in the video description if you want to check that out. And if you're unsure which version of the brakes you have on your particular car, then we have produced another video that will show you how to easily determine which version you have. Again, there'll be a link to that in the video description. So now we've covered that one important point, let's get the job done. So first part of the job, before we remove any of these brake components, what we want to do is get a wheel nut and put it on your wheel bolt that's closest to the 12 o'clock position. And the reason for that is when we start disassembling these brake components, there is a chance that your brake rotor could fall from the vehicle, and obviously that could cause injury. So if we put that little wheel bolt on as close to the top as possible, that's going to stop that from happening. Now you can make this job a little bit easier for yourself. If you've lifted the entire front of the car rather than just one corner, you can turn the steering wheel and actually turn this outwards. That's going to give you much better access to the rear of our caliper here. Now that's not essential, you can still do it with the caliper in the straight position like it is now, but we're going to go ahead and turn our steering wheel, move this out. That's going to give you guys a better view of the back as we work on this caliper. So our brake caliper is essentially made of two components. We have this central section just here and these two little arms that come off the end. That's the brake caliper itself, and then this little section here, which actually comes around the front, just there, that's the caliper bracket. And the thing that holds these two components together, we have two pins with bolts on the end just here. They're actually slider pins. We'll show you this later in the video. And then the only thing that's holding this whole caliper on to the car, we have two large bolts, top and bottom at the back here. And those two bolts are actually connecting our caliper bracket directly to the knuckle on the car. This center section, the actual caliper itself, is actually free to move backwards and forwards. The first thing we need to do is to separate our caliper from our caliper bracket. We're going to be doing that by removing these two bolts. So to make the removal of these components easier, I'm going to soak all of the bolts and fixings in a bit of penetration spray. I'll be using a PB Blaster, but there are hundreds of different versions of this on the market, and WD-40 do a good penetration spray as well, and that's quite cheap on Amazon. I'll add links to that in the video description for you. But what this penetration spray does, when you put it on a fixing, it actually helps to soak in. It can get in behind the heads and actually get into the start of the threads as well. So if you've got a particularly stubborn fixing, if you soaked it with some of this for 5 or 10 minutes before you try and attack it, it can sometimes make the job a heck of a lot easier. So it's definitely worth not missing this step. So just put a little bit on these bolts here at the top and at the bottom. You can do exactly the same on the caliper bracket bolts at the rear here. Just a little bit above each of those fixings. So for the removal of these little bolts that we have on the end, one thing to note is when we start undoing these, there's a possibility that this section here with the rubber boot and this little head just here can start to twist with it. Now you'll notice if you look carefully, this has a flat section on it. So if this does start to twist, you can just grab yourself a spanner, slot it on there and counter hold as you undo on the end here. Usually, especially if these brakes have been on here for a while, as these has, you should be able to remove that without this moving, but be sure to keep an eye on that. If it does start to move, make sure you counter hold it. Exactly the same at the top. And just for safety, just going to hand tighten that back in a couple of turns just so it can't fall off. Very unlikely, this has been on here for a while, but just for safety. So now we're going to be removing our caliper, and when we remove this, we don't want to leave it hanging on our flexible brake hose here. So obviously that could damage the hose and also damage where it connects. So we do want to be a little bit careful with this. So when we lift this off, we actually want to hang it up and out of the way. So I've got myself a long cable tie here. So when we lift this up carefully, we're just going to make sure that I'm not twisting the hose in an incorrect direction. I'm just going to lift it up and put it up out of the way. I could tie it up here or possibly up to the spring up here. So let's remove my little bolt again. So now this is free to be removed. And what will be holding it on is actually going to be slightly clamping our brake pads in the centre. And what we're hoping is that we don't have too much force, and so we can kind of wiggle this and get this out. Sometimes these are quite hard, so we may need to compress the pistons that are in there a little bit, but we'll try removing it as it is first of all. So now for the removal of the caliper, just want to give it a bit of a pull, top and bottom on these little arms here, and see how easy or hard it feels like it's going to be to remove. This one doesn't feel too bad. We've got movement here. Yeah, so there it is. So this one will definitely be able to come off. Now if yours is a little bit sticky, then what you can sometimes do is actually compress the pistons back in a little bit. And there's a couple of different ways you can do that. So the first thing you can do, if yours is a little bit sticky, just grab the caliper from the rear and just pull it forward using some body weight. Don't go crazy. You just want to compress those calipers just 1 or 2 millimeters. The other thing you can do is, if yours is really stuck, grab yourself a long, decent flathead screwdriver, and we've got that little gap. This is the rotor right here. We've got this gap, so it's a vented rotor, in the middle. So you can put your screwdriver in there and lever just against our little edge here, and use that just to try and get yourself an extra couple of millimeters. Make sure you do the same on the top and the bottom, so you're moving both of those pistons if you've got the heavy duty ones like we have here. Plus if you get really stuck, you can normally get an extra couple of millimeters just by levering it with a good screwdriver. So now hopefully we're at a stage where we can just slide this caliper off over the brake pads. So now we need to tie this up. So I think to keep this straight, I'll lift it up this way, and I've got a nice point here. I think I'll tie this up to this spring up here, try and get it as high as I can and out of the way. So next we're going to remove our brake pads, which are just here. As you can see, these don't actually have very much wear on them, but they are actually sticking in these calipers, which is why they're being replaced. Although they haven't had much wear, they are actually quite old. And I'm trying to push them out. As you can see, they're pretty well jammed in there, just as I suspected. So I'm going to grab a tool and get these removed. Now you should be able to push these out by hand, but I can't, so I'm just going to grab my screwdriver here. I'm going to put it on this little flat edge here. I'm just going to give it a bit of a tap with the rubber mallet. I just want to get this started here at the top, and then likewise at the bottom. Now I've got this opened up, I can put a flathead screwdriver in. It's a little tip for you, especially if you intend to keep your old rotors. I'm going to put this in and try and lever this out. Don't lever in this direction, because this will force the bottom of the screwdriver into the face of your rotor. Instead you want to move in this direction. The pads are definitely being replaced, these are scrap, so we don't mind if we damage the face of the pads. Don't really want to damage the face of the rotor, especially if you are of course going to be reusing it. These are pretty well stuck in there. If yours gets stuck in, a little tip for you, rather than keep forcing it, is to actually rewind it and then do it again. You should get it a little bit further each time. As you can see, our pads were particularly stubborn, and this is exactly why I said that they're locking and jamming up, even though they look relatively new. So I'm going to do exactly the same here on the other side. Hopefully you should just be able to pull yours out by hand. Obviously in this situation we can't. So with our pads out of the way, it's now time to remove our caliper bracket. And to do that we have 2 bolts holding it on at the rear here, one here, one here. They can vary, sometimes they're size 21, these are size 19. And just for the sake of speed, I'm going to be putting the air gun on these. If you don't have that, of course, you can just use a standard breaker bar or a decent length wrench. And just screw that back in so we don't want it to fall off. I'm going to do the other one. So I'm holding this on now. There's only these 2 bolts that are holding it on. Remove those 2 and we can just lift our bracket away from the car. Now we can remove the rotor. So I'm going to get rid of this bolt now. And then make sure you've got the rotor properly supported underneath. Just draw it forward, they are quite heavy, and away. And on the face of our wheel bearing here, you can see it's been greased on a previous installation. So what I'm going to do, just before I carry on, I'm just going to remove this old grease. And we will be putting new grease on when we come to refit it. I prefer it personally, but it is completely optional. But regardless of that, I'm just going to get rid of this old stuff. First of all, just give it a good wipe. with a bit of a rag or blue paper, just to get rid of most of it. Also around this circular section in the centre. Next I'm going to put a little bit of, this is just standard brake cleaner. This is really good at cleaning up this type of stuff. When I spray this one, just a little bit on the face of our bearing here. You want to be careful not to get it into the centre. This is where your axle comes through. We don't have anything to do with that, just this facing here. Now I've got a caliper removed, we want to give it a bit of a test for a couple of reasons. We want to make sure that these pistons are going to move freely, and we have to what's called rewind these pistons. The reason being, of course, is we've just worn those brake pads down a certain amount. We're going to be fitting a brand new set which are nice and chunky. So then this caliper's got to go over a thicker overall distance than it did before. So to create that space that we need, we've actually got to physically push these pistons, we have two on this heavy duty version, back into the body of the caliper. One of the cheapest and easiest ways to do this is to grab one of these gadgets. And this is called a brake pad spreader, also known as a caliper spreader. It's essentially two plates that can either move apart to spread or back together to release. And these are literally $12, $13, $14 on Amazon. And again, we'll add some links for these for you as well. So we're going to use these two plates to push the brake piston back into the body of the caliper. So what I'm going to do is put this over the front of the piston, just there, to make sure that it's clear, and then I need to start opening this up. Now I've got contact on the front side just here on the plate, and also the back plate is now touching our piston. And this should be really easy to twist forward. It shouldn't need all that much force to rewind that caliper. If you find that yours isn't moving, you're really struggling, the chances are there's something wrong with that piston, and so that needs further investigation. Let's see what these are like here. Yeah, this is rewinding well. You can see I'm not using much force here at all. Just rewind just till it stops. That's fully rewound now. And I just release the pressure here and remove the tool. You can see this one's now been pushed all the way back in. We'll do exactly the same on the top one here. Now if you do find that one of your pistons is stuck and it will not move, then you can sometimes pick up repair kits for these calipers. But to be honest with you, these calipers on the Grand Caravans, especially if you're picking up an aftermarket one, they're so cheap that it's really not worth messing around with. If you've got a broken caliper, they're so cheap, it's just a lot easier and quicker just to replace the whole thing. And we do have a separate video on caliper replacement if you need it. Again, links in the video description. So next we need to look at preparing our caliper brackets to accept the brake pads. Now it doesn't matter whether you're fitting a brand new caliper as we are today, or whether you're using the old one, it makes no difference, the principle's identical. The important thing with these brackets is actually they have these additional sections. Here there are 4 of them, and these are little clips that the actual brake pads slide backwards and forwards in. As we can see on our old one here, these clips are particularly bad. These should be nice and shiny, and they really aren't. Now you can grab some kind of standard brake cleaner, give them a bit of a spray, and then also grab a copper brush and give them a bit of a clean up. You can clean them up. However, if they are particularly grotty, as these ones are here, doesn't matter how much you clean them, they're just not going to be as good as a new set. And thankfully, when it comes to a new set, they're not something that you have to buy separately as long as you buy correctly. So first of all, if you have bought a brand new caliper, it should come with a brand new set ready to go. If you're reusing your old bracket, then the best way to do it is to ensure that the brake pads that you buy come complete with these. Some do and some don't. And we will be adding Amazon links for the pads, both the standard and heavy duty versions, into the video description for you. And all of the links that we will be adding definitely come with these clips. So that's definitely going to make your life a lot easier. And if you are removing the old ones, just grab the bottom, just give them a bit of a wiggle and a bit of a pull, a bit of convincing, depending on how long they've been off. You should be able to just pull these off like so. And I'm going to show you how to fit the new ones. I'm going to fit them onto the new caliper in just a second. And then if you've got an old caliper bracket like we have here, you also want to give it a bit of a clean up in there. Again, get your brake fluid in there, Get your copper brush in there, give that a good clean, get that as clean as you can before you slot the new clips in. I'm going to show you how to fit the new clips. I'm going to be doing it on the new caliper for you in just a second. So the second thing that's essential to mention when it comes to these caliper brackets is these two slider pins. Now the way that these pins work is essentially they slide backwards and forwards, as we can see here on our brand new caliper. And I'll pull this out, just pull it forward. And we can see that we've got a nice clean pin. We can see the nice fresh grease on there as well. So obviously a brand new caliper, we know that this is all properly greased up. But what can happen over time, these can again get a bit of corrosion and they lose their functionality. And so they actually stop being able to slide backwards and forward easily, which is what you need when you press that brake pedal. You're compressing, and then when you release, it just releases like so. And so you actually need this movement here. This is essential. So if you have a look at our old one here, yeah, you can see that one's locked solid. There's a tiny bit of movement in this one, but it's definitely not moving as freely as it should. And that one's not moving at all. Now thankfully these pins, they're all the same, front, rear, heavy duty, standard, it really doesn't matter. So what I'll do is I'll show you a quick sequence now on how to ensure that you get these cleaned up and properly lubricated. But you can see that's got very little movement on it, that's got none. You don't want to fit that back onto the car because your brakes aren't going to work. It's essential we get these moving nicely again. So let's do that. So whilst we're here, before we refit the carrier, this is an ideal opportunity to grease the slider pins. Now the way these work, they have a little rubber boot. If you just pull that back, you'll see that'll just pop off. And then you can see there's the slider pin right there. So start by giving these a bit of a clean up, get some of the old grease off. Just be careful of the rubber boots, yeah, you obviously don't want to damage them. Just going to give that a little bit of brake cleaner. A good type of grease to use on these slider pins is this moly grease, which is lithium based grease. And they use this in things like CV joints, so it's kind of designed for heavy duty metal on metal. Let's take a look at fitting our brand new clips. As I said, if you buy right, then your calipers should come with these, and also the brake pads should if you buy the right set as well. Now it's important to realise with these, you've actually got two different types here. So you can see that these two are a pair and these two are also a pair, and they're kind of the opposite way around. So you're probably wondering which side they actually fit into our bracket here. So the first way, if you look at it side on, you see this little top section's got a very square cutout, very even, and that's this square section that we have up here. So that tells us that that is the top of our clip there, and this part is the bottom. And then once we've established that, then it should be quite obvious, because if we were to put it on in this direction, then we have this part, and more importantly this little spring clip right in the middle. And of course we can't do that because the rotor is going to sit in the middle. And so it's very easy to tell that this one literally has to fit here. So we know that the top is matching the top, and the spring cannot be in the center. So this is where this one's going to fit. And likewise for the second type, again we've got the square section right here, square section here, spring to the outside, nothing in the middle. So that's how we set these up. And to fit these, the key is to get the top section fitted. So you want to get that lined up as square as you can, push that down, and with your other finger push the center right in here. You've got the clip either side, one here and one here, one here, one here. And what you don't want to do is put it on an angle on one side, because then you'll really struggle to get the other side on. So you want to try and get the whole thing as square as possible, and then push it down as flat as you can. Just be careful of this little arm that we have coming off of the spring here. If it pops to one side like it did there, just put it back to the middle, try and keep it nice and straight, push it down, and there we go. And if you take a look from the side, just make sure that you've got a nice even gap all the way around, and it's definitely seated correctly as far as it will go. That's perfect. So repeat that with the other three. So next let's take a quick look at our rotors. And thankfully, again, rotors on these cars are particularly cheap. You can pick up front rotors for a pair on Amazon for the standard brakes at around $55. And for the heavy duty ones, they're about $65. As you can see, the version that we have here is a slightly more advanced version. These are both drilled and slotted, and also they have in the center here this painted section that's called black hat, and that also is good for resisting rust. And these particular discs weren't actually very much more expensive at all than the standard non-drilled and non-slotted versions. It's very important to remember two versions of the brakes. We have both the standard brakes or the heavy duty brakes fitted to this car, and the rotors and the pads for standard and heavy duty are different, so you must ensure you know which version you have. And remember, if you are unsure, we do have that video that there'll be a link to in the video description that tells you how to easily work out which version you have fitted to your car. And also in the video description, you will find those Amazon links for both rotors and pads, and that includes standard and heavy duty versions. And we'll also put these drilled and slotted versions in there as well, in case you're interested in these. And one quick thing to note, if you do pick up ones that are slotted or drilled like this, they are usually sided, as we can see here, very clearly labelled by the manufacturer. And the main reason for that is not actually the slots or the drill bits, it's actually the vents in that little gap. If you look on the side, you've got that gap that goes around there, and in there you've got vents, and the vents will actually run in a certain direction to try and bring air into the centre of the brake rotor to help it cool. So it's very, very important that you always follow the manufacturer instructions. If they're sided like these are, make sure they go on the correct side. So very important, brand new rotors. They are all covered in a light layer of grease. You can normally see it when you shine them in the light. They do have a coating of grease on them. The reason being is they want these discs to arrive to you exactly like you see them here. Nice, shiny and brand new. What we don't want is to open a brand new rotor and have some surface corrosion on it. So to help prevent that happening, in the packaging it's both vacuum packed and also covered with a light layer of grease. But of course we need to remove that grease before we start using these brakes. And that's because brake pads are actually slightly absorbent, and so that grease can go into the facing of your brake pads, and of course we don't want that. So we're going to grab our brake cleaner. This is standard brake cleaner. Again, if you need this, there will be links. I'm going to give this a good clean up with this and some blue paper. Just give the whole face a good wipe over. That's the grease that we're pulling off there. And also in the centres. It's always best if you start with this raised section facing up. The reason being is we've just put onto this cardboard, by placing this down here, we've put grease onto the cardboard. When we flip this over, as long as we put this face down, it doesn't matter if that gets a tiny bit of grease on it, we don't want it going onto the facings. So now we can flip it straight over, put it down, and nothing's going to touch the face that we just cleaned. And do exactly the same, clean up this side as well. So now our rotor is ready to be fitted. Before we do that, we're just going to prep our wheel bearing ready to accept it. So for the wheel bearing, before we fit the rotor onto the front of it here, what I like to do is grab a little bit. This is just standard copper anti-seize, also known as copper grease. I'm just going to put a very light coating onto the faces here. We're going to be careful not to get it onto the studs, just onto the coating, just onto the faces here, and also just around the edge of this circle, the outer edge of this circle just here. And this is completely optional, not everyone does this, but I like to do this. It just helps prevent things from binding together. So you know that your rotor, especially if you're in a rust area, your rotors are going to be prevented from ever being able to stick to your wheel bearing. At least that's the theory. Makes it a little bit easier and good for longevity. So it's only a very light coating that you want. Make sure you spread it around. and avoid the studs. Just try and get a nice thin coating to the entirety of the face here. And then finally an extra little bit just around the outer edge of this circle there. That's done. And before we put the rotor on, make sure you have one of your wheel nuts handy, because just as before, we're going to push this on, lock it into place, stop it falling off again. The other thing I like to do when you're putting these back together, because we've got a bit of movement, is put a second wheel bolt in, not on the side that we're going to be refitting the caliper, just to hold that as flush to the wheel bearing as possible. Just makes aligning all those brake components just that little bit easier. So before we fit our caliper bracket back to the car, it's a good idea to grease these clips, because we want those brake pads to slide in and out of here nice and easily. And the best stuff for this is this. This is just standard brake grease. This is absolutely perfect. It's non-conductive. It's great with metal and rubber components. Makes it perfect for brakes. Again, there will be Amazon links to this if you need it. I'm going to get a little bit of my grease. I'm going to use a brush to apply it. Basically, we want to apply grease to this edge here, the entirety, all three sides of the little trough there, and also down here. So essentially, pretty much all of this can do with greasing. So from this side here, just a light layer of grease. Make sure you get it into those corners. Doesn't have to go on thick, just a nice even layer all the way around. So for refitting our caliper bracket, just slide it in gently over the rotor, and we'll look at getting these bolts through. That one started. Snug these up a little bit, not too much. We're going to torque them in a second. So grab your torque wrench, torque these up, 169 newton meters, which is 125 foot-pounds. So now brake pads. Here's the brake pads that we've got. These particular ones are Auto Shack. These are amongst the cheaper ones. Not very expensive at all. Again, two versions, standard or heavy duty. And prices in the kind of $20 to $40 range, depending on the ones that you're after. One important thing, as mentioned before, make sure that yours come with the replacement clips. And we will be adding Amazon links for both standard and heavy duty into the video description for you. And all of the ones that we'll link definitely come with these clips. It's going to make your life a lot easier. So let's take a look at the pads. Now when you're handling these pads, remember the faces are slightly absorbent, so if you've got grease and dirt, what you don't want to be doing is wiping that over the face. So try and get your hands away from the faces of the pads whilst you're handling them. Now before we fit our pads, we're going to grab some of our brake grease again, and you just want to apply just a very light amount just to the ends here around this these edges just here. You don't want to get it onto the face of the pad, just on the edges. So be quite careful with it. Again, it's just that little bit of extra grease. You want to ensure that these pads can move as freely as possible in the caliper. We've greased the caliper and we're just helping it out a little bit further, doing exactly the same, just on the ends of the pads, just where they make contact here. Now on these little clips, you may find that yours also have like this little spring mechanism just here. So when we're fitting our pads, we want to be careful that we fit the arm of the pads in the gap between the inside edge of that spring and the end of that little arm. So that's where it's got to fit. And basically what happens is when the pads are pushed inwards, that little spring just helps pull them back out. So we don't want to put the brake pads in front of that arm. They need to be in that gap from there to there. So I want to fit these little arms. I can do it at a slight angle, making sure that I'm not going past the front. I've got to kind of feed them in front of the spring there. Same on the bottom, and then gently slide it in and straighten it up. There we go. There. And when it's in place, look how easily that moves. This is how brake pads should be. And just check that you've got that nice even motion top and bottom, which we have. That is perfect. So we'll do exactly the same with the other pad. So this next stage is optional. You don't really need to do it on these more modern brakes because they do have these backings, but I like to put a bit of the brake grease. I traditionally do this with copper grease, but brake grease is kind of the more modern way of doing it. Just a very light coating just across the back here, just on this area that has this kind of padded section on it. Just nice and light like that, and exactly the same on the rear. So now we can go ahead and cut down the caliper. Again, be careful with your new flexi line there. Make sure that's not twisted. And then we can slide this over the pads. Now when you slide this on, you might find that your slider pins, you have to push them back in a little bit if the arm doesn't quite clear. Sometimes you've got to push them in. These ones were okay. So now I just want to line these holes up, ready for these bolts, into the end of the slider pins. Remembering to watch this, we don't want this turning. And same on the bottom. So now we need to torque up these two bolts. So these are size 14 and this is 35 Newton meters with a torque wrench, which is 26 foot-pounds. And so there we have it. We now have our brand new rotor and our brand new pads. So now you can go ahead and consider this job done, put your wheel back on and you're good to go. However, before you jump on the highway at 120 kilometers an hour, whatever it might be, you really want to ensure that these brakes are working correctly. You want to start off by doing that just on your driveway. So to begin with, just start moving the car backwards and forwards between drive and reverse, very, very slowly, just checking that the brake pedal feels right and that these brakes are binding as you think that they should. And if that feels good, then take it for a very short drive at low speed just around the block. And again, you want to actually be using these brakes to try and bed these in a little bit. And as long as your brakes are performing as they should and the brake pedal feels right, then you're good to go. So thank you very much for watching. It is very much appreciated. Before you leave us today, can you take 1 second out of your busy day? Please, at the very least, be sure to hit that like button for us. And whilst you're there, why not also hit subscribe? We've got hundreds more great videos on these cars just waiting for you to check out. And very importantly, the best thing that you can do to help support what we do is to be sure to check out those Amazon links. So please remember, in the video description you'll find Amazon links to all of the parts and the tools that we've shown you in this video, and we have the best possible prices. So thank you once again for joining us here at U-Wrench, and we'll see you down the road.